The Black-Herited title fed homeless triplets every day. Years later, three Mercedes-Benz cars pulled up to her roadside shop. Opening hook, three dramatic hooks. Scene 1, heavy rain, present day. Heavy rain hammers the cracked concrete of Onitsha's main market road like a punishment from the sky. The kind of rain that does not warn you, it simply arrives, swallowing color and sound in peace. Gutters overflow. Market women shriek and scramble to cover their goods with tarpaulins. Motorcycles skid and splash through dark puddles the size of small ponds. And through all of it, through the chaos, through the cold sheets of water, through the thunder that shakes the zinc rooftops like the hand of God, one woman runs. She is not young. Her wrapper clings to her body, soaked through. Her gray hair is matted to her face. Her sandals slap against the wet ground, barely holding on. She cups her hands around her mouth and screams into the storm, her voice splitting open with something more painful than fear. Tunde Solar Kunnel. Her voice breaks on the last name. She falls to her knees in the middle of the road, water rushing past her in small rivers, mud splashing up her wrapper, and she reaches both hands toward the sky as lightning rips the clouds apart. Where are my children? Where are my children? Nobody stops, nobody answers. The street swallows her cry. Scene 2, flashback many years earlier. Cut to a different world. The sun is warm and golden. The street is busy but calm. A younger woman, Ezinne, maybe 35, moves with quiet purpose beside a small roadside table. Her face is smooth, her wrapper clean though faded. Her hands are careful, deliberate. She sets one single plate of steaming white rice and red stew onto the edge of her wooden table. She steps back, and three small boys, identical, each a mirror of the other, approach the plate together. They are perhaps 7 years old. They do not fight. They do not grab. With the solemn dignity of much older souls, they reach in with their small fingers and divide the rice into 3 equal portions, pushing each share gently to a different side of the plate, as if they have done this 1,000 times, as if fairness is the only religion they know. Ezinne watches them from behind, and tears slide silently down her face. She does not wipe them. She lets them fall. Scene 3, luxury reveal, present day. The same Onitsha street. Now it is a bright afternoon, years later. The usual noise, the horns, the hawkers, the generators humming, all of it fades as 3 vehicles turn slowly onto the road. 3 black Mercedes-Benz cars, brand new, gleaming like obsidian in the afternoon light. They move together in a deliberate procession, no rush, no hurry, as if they know exactly where they are going and have waited a long time to arrive. They stop perfectly, quietly, directly in front of a humble wooden stall at the roadside. The crowd that has gathered watches in stunned silence. A woman selling oranges forgets to call out her price. A boy on a bicycle brakes and stares. The doors of all 3 cars open at the same moment. 3 men step out, tall, broad-shouldered, expensive suits, polished shoes, the quiet confidence of people who have built something real in this world. They look neither left nor right. Their eyes go immediately with the precision of a compass, finding north, to the small, gray-haired woman behind the wooden table. She has not seen them yet. She is counting small coins in her palm. The tallest of the 3 men steps forward. He drops slowly to one knee on the dusty road, not caring about his suit, not caring about the crowd. He reaches into his breast pocket and brings out something small, a torn, faded piece of cloth. Old, soft, worn at the edges. He looks up at her. "Mama," he says, his voice shaking, "it's us." The woman looks up, and the coins fall from her hands. Warm, deeply emotional voice. Before we begin this powerful story, please take just 1 second, hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to believe in kindness today, and subscribe to our channel with the bell notification turned on. Stories like this one are rare. They remind us that no act of goodness is ever wasted, that what you pour into the world, even on your most broken, most exhausted, most hopeless days, comes back to you. Sometimes it takes years, but it comes back. Now let us begin. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Had Nothing But Kindness. In the busy, restless city of Onitsha, where the Niger River bends wide and slow and life moves fast and hard there, lived a woman named Ezinne. If you passed her on the street, you would not look twice. She was not remarkable in the ways that streets notice. She did not wear fine lace or gold jewelry. She did not drive a car or live in a gated compound. She had no title before her name, no diploma on a wall, no business card to hand to strangers. What she had was smaller than all of those things and also larger. She had a kind heart in an unkind world. Ezinne was in her mid-30s when this story begins. She had known what it meant to go to bed with an empty stomach. She had known what it meant to watch other children eat while she waited. Her own mother had died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of an aunt who was barely surviving herself. Ezinne had learned early that life does not always hold your hand. Sometimes it lets go without warning and you fall, and the falling is the lesson. But somewhere in that falling, she had made a quiet decision, the kind of decision that shapes a person's whole character without them ever saying it out loud. She had decided that if she ever had the power to soften someone else's hunger, even a little, she would use it. Not when she was rich, not when things were easy. Now, today, with whatever she had. And so she did. She lived in a one-room apartment in a narrow lane off the main road. The zinc roof leaked in 3 places during rain. The walls were old cement, cracked and gray, with a faded calendar hanging crooked on a nail. The floor was concrete, swept clean every morning, and her sleeping mat was thin but neatly rolled each day before sunrise. There was no refrigerator, no television, no couch. Just the mat, a small wooden stool, a kerosene lamp, and a little box where she kept her savings, a handful of crumpled notes, never very many. She was a food seller, not a restaurant owner, not a caterer, a roadside food seller, the most ordinary of occupations in Nigerian cities, and yet, in its own way, one of the most essential. She was the reason bus drivers could eat before a long route. She was the reason construction workers had energy to lift blocks by noon. She was the reason tired market women sat down for 10 minutes and felt human again. Every morning before the sun rose fully over the rooftops, Ezinne was already awake. She had no alarm clock. Her body simply knew. She woke in darkness, washed her face with cold water from a plastic bucket, tied her wrapper firmly at her waist, and knelt by the low charcoal stove in the narrow corridor outside her room. She lit the coals with practiced patience, fanning, adjusting, coaxing. And while the fire grew, she began to cook. Her ingredients were never extravagant. Rice or beans, depending on what she could afford that week. A small cut of stockfish or a few pieces of dry ponmo. Tomatoes and pepper blended together in a neighbor's electric blender for a small fee. Palm oil she bought in a recycled bottle from the roadside market every 3 days. Seasoning cubes, crayfish, a pinch of salt. Nothing unusual, but she cooked with her full attention, the way some people pray. She stirred and tasted. She adjusted and tasted again. She whispered encouragement to the pot like it could hear her. "Today will be better," she said softly into the steam. "God will provide. Let me do my part." By the time the first orange light appeared above the rooftops, the aroma from her pot had crept out of the corridor and into the lane, and down toward the main road, warm and savory, the smell of someone who cared. Chapter 2. Setting up her roadside stall. When the food was fully cooked and carefully packaged into old plastic containers with tight lids, Ezinne faced the part of her morning that required the most physical effort. She balanced her worn wooden table on her head, the same table, year after year, its legs repaired twice with nails she bought herself, its surface smoothed by 1,000 servings. In one hand she carried her bench. In the other, a bag with her containers, her ladle, her small water bowl, and her change purse. She walked to the roadside. It took about 15 minutes. She did not have a stall with walls or a roof. She did not pay rent for a proper shop. She had only the space beside the road where she set up her table each morning, and where, by unspoken agreement with the other traders, everyone knew it was Ezinne's spot. She arranged everything with the care of someone setting a table for honored guests. Containers lined up, ladle within reach, bench positioned so customers could sit comfortably while they ate, a small basin of clean water and a plastic cup for hand washing, because she believed people deserved to eat with dignity even on a busy road. And then she waited and called out and smiled. "Rice and stew, fresh, fresh, come and chop well, my brother. Madam, come, your body needs something hot today. I can see it on your face." She had a gift for that, for looking at people and saying the true thing, the small warm thing that made them feel seen rather than just sold to. And people came. Not crowds, not always, but a steady trickle of regulars who trusted her food and looked forward to her greetings. There were days when business was good, when she sold almost everything by early afternoon and counted her money in the shade with a small, satisfied smile. There were also days when the road was quiet, when people rushed past without stopping, when buses drove by without slowing, when the sun was too hot and the dust too thick, and the food sat cooling in its containers while her carefully counted coins dwindled to almost nothing. But she did not complain on those days. Not out loud, not to customers, not to God in any angry tone. She cleaned up. She carried her table home. She counted what remained. She planned for the next day. And the next day she came back. This was her life. This was her rhythm, ordinary, difficult, dignified. Chapter 3. Spotting the Homeless Triplets. She first noticed them on a Thursday afternoon in August, when the heat was the kind that makes the road shimmer and the air taste like metal. 3 small boys sitting in the thin strip of shade beside an unfinished concrete building across the road. The building had been abandoned mid-construction, someone's dream that ran out of money or luck or both. Its hollow windows stared out at the street like empty eyes. Stray dogs sometimes slept in its ground floor shell. And now, these 3 boys. They were identical. Every feature, every angle the same wide foreheads, the same serious dark eyes, the same slight tilt of the head when they looked at something that puzzled them. Triplets, unmistakably. 7 years old, she would later learn, though they seemed older somehow, or perhaps it was that their quietness had an age to it, an oldness, like people who had already learned not to expect too much from the world. Their clothes were torn, not the ordinary kind of torn that comes from play, but the deep, permanent torn that comes from wearing the same thing every day for too long with nobody to wash it or mend it. Shorts frayed at the thighs, thin t-shirts with holes at the shoulder, no shoes. Their feet were calloused and dusty. Their bodies were thin in the particular way that says not enough food, not today, not yesterday, maybe not the day before. But they were not begging. That was what stopped Ezinne. In a city full of children who stretched their hands at every window, these 3 sat quietly, not begging, not crying. They watched the road with calm, careful eyes. They watched people eat from roadside stalls, watched without approaching, without calling out, without performing hunger for an audience. They simply watched and waited. And sometimes one of them would rub his stomach, not dramatically, just absently, the way you rub a sore that you have stopped expecting anyone else to notice. Ezinne watched them watch the world. She was in the middle of serving a customer her ladle halfway through a scoop of stew when she saw the smallest of the 3 lick his lips, not at anything in particular, just at the smell in the air, the same smell that came from her pot. She watched him do it, and something moved in her chest, not pity exactly, but something older and more specific than pity. Recognition. She had been that child. She knew what that lick of the lips meant. She knew what it cost that boy to sit still and not beg. She knew the particular pride of hungry children who have decided that their dignity is the one thing the world cannot take from them without their permission. Her ladle froze mid-scoop. The customer waiting in front of her cleared his throat politely. She finished his plate. She took his money. She watched the boys across the road for a long, quiet moment. Chapter 4: The First ACT of Kindness. The argument inside her head was honest, at least. She did not lie to herself or dress it up in spiritual language. You are poor, her practical mind said clearly. You are barely making enough. You have rent to pay. You have your own belly to worry about. If you start this, you cannot stop. And you cannot afford what you cannot stop. It was true, all of it was true. The customer beside her, a man in work overalls with a calloused hand that jingled with small change, had noticed her staring. He followed her gaze across the road and sucked his teeth. Those street boys, leave them, don't start what you cannot finish. They will follow you everywhere. She nodded, she gave him his change, she watched him walk away. She looked at the three boys again. The middle one, the one who would later tell her his name was Solar, had picked up a small pebble from the ground and was turning it in his fingers. Not playing with it, just holding something. The way a lonely person holds something small when there is nothing else to hold. Ezinne put down her ladle. She looked into her pot. There was enough rice and stew left for perhaps 2 more decent servings. These were her end-of-day profits, the food that, when sold, would make the difference between a good day and a struggling one. She stood there, calculating silently, the way poor people always have to calculate, every small decision weighed against every other small thing. Then she scooped. One generous plate. Rice mounded in the center, stew ladled carefully over it, a piece of panmo placed on top because she wanted them to have something to chew, something that felt like a full meal. She walked to the edge of her table and called across the road, keeping her voice gentle, low, the kind of voice you use when you do not want to startle something fragile. Come, come, my children, don't be afraid, come and eat. The three boys looked at each other. This was a language they had developed, the whole conversation held in a single look between identical faces. A check, a question, an answer, a decision. They stood up together and crossed the road. They stopped a few feet in front of her, not too close, still holding a little distance between themselves and this unexpected kindness, a learned caution. She understood immediately. Children who have been disappointed before do not rush at good things. They approach slowly, ready to retreat. She crouched down to their height. She set the plate on the bench between them. Eat, she said simply. No condition, just eat. They sat, and they divided the food. She had to turn away. She pretended to arrange her containers, her back to them, and she pressed her knuckle briefly to her mouth and breathed. Three small boys, sharing one plate, dividing rice with their fingers into 3 exactly equal portions with the unconscious fairness of people for whom fairness had become survival. She had never seen anything so quietly heartbreaking and so quietly beautiful at the same time. She collected herself. By the time she turned back around, the plate was almost empty. The boys ate slowly, not frantically, careful, deliberate, as if they wanted to remember the taste of every grain. When they were done, the tallest boy stood and looked directly at her. "Thank you, Auntie," he said. She opened her mouth to say it was nothing, but she stopped herself. Because it was not nothing, it was something, and he deserved to hear that acknowledged. "You are welcome, my son," she said instead. "Come back tomorrow." Chapter 5: Meeting Tunday, Solar and Kunel. They came back the next day. Of course they did. And the day after that, and the one after that. On the third visit, Ezinne sat with them while they ate and asked their names. "Tunday," said the tallest one, serious and still. He had a way of holding himself shoulders back, chin level, that seemed far too formal for a 7-year-old. And she would come to understand that Tunday had appointed himself protector of his brothers and carried that responsibility in his body at all times. "Solar," said the middle one, and he smiled when he said it, a wide, bright, slightly mischievous smile that crinkled his eyes. Solar, she would learn, talked more than the other two combined. He had opinions about everything and was not shy about sharing them. He noticed things, small things, beautiful things, and named them out loud. "Kunal," said the last one quietly. He did not smile or explain. He simply looked at her with those wide, serious eyes that seemed to be measuring something, processing something, storing information for later use. Connell, she would learn, was the thinker. He spoke rarely, but when he spoke, people listened, because he only said what was necessary and what was true. She asked about their parents, with the careful gentleness of someone stepping around broken glass. Tunde answered for all three. His voice was even, controlled, the voice of someone who has told this story enough times that the raw grief has calcified into simple fact. Our mama and papa died in the market fire, last year, the fire that burned Achanya. Ezinne had heard about that fire. Everyone in Onitsha had. It had spread through the lower market in the dry season, consuming stalls, goods, vehicles, and lives. Dozens of people had died. Hundreds of families had lost everything in an afternoon. Lord, you have any family, any uncle, auntie? We have one uncle, Solar said, losing his smile for a moment. But he said he cannot take 3 boys. He took us to his house for 1 week and then he brought us back to the road. Silence. Where do you sleep? Ezinne asked. Tunde nodded his head toward the unfinished building across the road. Inside there. The ground floor, back corner. It doesn't have water when rain comes. She looked at the building. She looked at the 3 boys. 7 years old, sleeping on a concrete floor, with no one to come back to, no one to call, no plate of food guaranteed tomorrow, and still dividing everything equally among themselves, maintaining that quiet dignity she had noticed from the very first afternoon. From that day she knew their names, and they knew hers. Mama Ezinne. Solar called her the very next visit, and the name stuck immediately, taken up by all 3 with a naturalness that made her press her palm flat against her chest for a moment, as if to hold something in. Chapter 6: The Daily Ritual and Growing Bond. A week became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month, and the routine set itself into the frame of every day like a nail hammered deep into good wood. Every afternoon, when Ezinne's last paid customers had eaten and gone, she put aside 1 plate, not scraped together from leavings, a proper plate, scooped fresh from the pot. Sometimes it was white rice and stew with fish. Sometimes it was beans and plantain. Sometimes, on the hard days when the pot ran low, it was only gari soaked in water with a bit of sugar and a small handful of ground nuts. Whatever it was, she set it aside with the same deliberateness, the same intention, as if the act of setting it aside was itself a kind of prayer. And every afternoon, Tunde, Solar, and Connell appeared. They did not always come running. They came walking steady, unhurried, with a quiet trust in the rightness of this arrangement that Ezinne found more touching than any effusive gratitude would have been. They trusted that the plate would be there. They trusted her, and she carried that trust like something precious and fragile that she refused to drop. She began to learn them more deeply. Solar was the first to start talking freely. Within 2 weeks, he was narrating his day to her with the enthusiasm of someone reporting important news. He had found a blue bottle cap on the road and wanted to know what she thought about blue versus green. He had seen a man fix a generator and had watched the whole process carefully and could now explain it in detail. He had opinions about which Okada riders were reckless and which were careful and which ones, in his considered view, should not be on the road at all. She listened to everything and laughed at the right places and asked questions that made his eyes light up. Connell never talked much, but she noticed things about him. He noticed everything. He would sit with his food and his eyes would track a person crossing the road, a bird landing on a wire, the pattern of clouds moving. He was building something in his mind, an internal world of observations and connections that he kept mostly to himself. But occasionally he would say one sentence that stopped everyone. Mama, that man who passes here every Tuesday, he is the only person on this road who always looks up instead of at his feet. And they would all look at the man, and he would be looking up, and they would look at Connell, and he would go back to his food as if he had said nothing remarkable. Tunde watched over his brothers. Even while eating, he positioned himself slightly between them and the road, as if ready. When other street children wandered past and looked at the food, it was Tunde who met their eyes with a level, calm gaze that communicated without threat, without words that this was not up for negotiation. He never started trouble. He simply maintained a steady, quiet authority that people of all ages instinctively respected. The week stacked into months. Some of the other traders on the road noticed. Reactions varied. Madame Chinier, who sold fried fish and pepper soup 2 stalls down, had the most consistent reaction. She would lean across and shake her head with the particular pleasure of someone who enjoys being proven right. Ezinne, you are still feeding those boys. You are wasting your resources on people who will not remember you tomorrow. You think they care about you. They are using you. When they grow, you will not hear from them again. This is Africa, my sister nobody remembers. Ezinne would smile politely and say nothing. She had learned that some people, when they could not understand something, called it foolishness. It was easier for them than asking themselves why they could not do the same. The boys became known on that stretch of road. People who had initially muttered about them began to acknowledge them with a nod. The man who sold water sachets let them pick up fallen ones without chasing them. The woman with the groundnut cart sometimes slipped them each a small handful without being asked. Small kindnesses, rippling outward, started by one woman with one plate. Chapter 7: Mockery, Struggle and Sacrifice. But life did not become easier for Ezinne because of her kindness. In the economy of her daily existence, kindness had a cost that she paid every single day. The plate she set aside for the boys was a plate she did not sell. On a good day that was manageable, she would sell enough to cover her ingredients, her small daily expenses, her rent contribution, and still have a little left. On a bad day, that unsold plate was the difference between breaking even and going into debt. And the bad days came more frequently, as word spread that Ezinne's stall was where the homeless triplets ate. Some customers avoided her, not many but enough to matter. A few of her regular market traders, respectable people with good clothes and opinions about cleanliness and propriety, stopped eating at her table when they saw the boys nearby. "I cannot eat where street children are sitting," one man told her plainly, adjusting his briefcase under his arm. "It is not personal, Ezinne, just business." She understood. She did not argue. She watched him walk to a stall 3 spots down and sit and eat. Her landlord, a heavy-set man named Mr. Obichina, knocked on her door near the end of one month with his hand already out before he finished his greeting. "Ezinne, rent." "Mr. Obichina, I am 2 weeks short this month, but I will." 2 weeks? You are feeding other people's children and you cannot pay your own rent. What kind of sense is that? You think God will come and pay me? She endured it. She said sorry. She promised. She paid what she had and made up the rest the following month, eating only Gary and water herself for 4 days until she had rebuilt her savings. There were evenings after she had packed her table, walked home, bathed with cold water, and sat in the dim light of her kerosene lamp when the weariness settled over her like something with weight. Actual physical weight. She would sit on her mat with her legs stretched out and her hands in her lap and feel the full size of the problem she had taken on. She was not rich. She could not rescue them. She could not house them or clothe them or enroll them in school. She could only feed them, 1 plate per afternoon, 1 day at a time. And sometimes the smallness of that felt crushing the gap between what they needed and what she could give. But then she would think of Tunde's level eyes, Solar's unprompted laughter, Kunnel's occasional single sentences that stopped time, and she would know, with a certainty that lived in her body and not just her mind, that even though she could not do everything, she had to keep doing this one thing, because they had learned to trust the plate, and you do not break the trust of children who have had everything else broken. One evening she passed the back of the unfinished building and heard voices. She stopped. She should have kept walking, but she didn't. It was Solar and Tunde, talking in the low tones of an important conversation. "Do you think she will stop one day?" Solar was asking. A long pause. "Even if she stops," Tunde said, "we must never forget her. Even if we never see her again after this, we remember. When we grow up, we remember. And we come back." Silence. Then Solar, his voice softer now, "How will we find her?" "She will be here," Tunde said with a certainty that an adult would have called naive. "She will be here. People like her, they stay." Ezinne pressed her palm flat against the rough concrete wall of the building and closed her eyes for a moment. In the morning, she bought a small extra piece of stockfish from her own pocket and put it in the boys' plate without explaining why. Chapter 8: The painful day they disappeared. It happened without warning, the way the worst things always do. On that morning, Ezinne's pot had done unusually well. She sold earlier than expected, more customers than usual, a minibus that broke down nearby and whose passengers all needed food while they waited for the driver to fix the engine. By noon, her pot was almost empty, which was usually a cause for quiet celebration. But it meant that by mid-afternoon, when the triplets came as always, there was very little left. She looked at her pot. She looked at the boys. She felt the specific shame of being unable to deliver what someone is counting on you to deliver, a shame that has nothing to do with fault and everything to do with love. She scraped together what remained: a small amount of rice, a thin ladle of watered-down stew, and one piece of bread from the bag she sometimes brought from home. She arranged it as generously as she could, which was not very generous at all. "I'm sorry, my children. Today was a busy day. This is all that is left." Solar smiled immediately. "Mama, it's okay. Even small is good. At least it smells like you're cooking." She laughed despite herself. Solar. They ate, divided the bread into 3 pieces with the same solemn fairness, thanked her, left. The next afternoon, she bought extra ingredients. She cooked more. She set aside the plate as usual and looked across the road at 3 o'clock. They were not there. She waited. By 4 o'clock, still nothing. She thought perhaps they had gone somewhere. The boys sometimes ranged further than usual in the mornings, looking for small work to do, carrying loads at the market, fetching water, collecting bottles for the recycling man. Perhaps they were delayed. By 5, when she began to pack up, she crossed the road and went to the unfinished building. The back corner was empty. The small pile of old newspaper they had used as padding was still there, and a single small sandal, only one, belonging to one of them, and she could never tell whose lay on its side against the wall, as if dropped in a hurry. "Tunde Solar Kunnel." Her voice went into the hollow building and came back to her, slightly changed by the emptiness. She asked around. The water sachet man had not seen them since that morning. The groundnut woman said she thought she had seen them talking to a man earlier in the day, a man she didn't recognize, driving a car, but she hadn't paid much attention. That night Ezinne could not sleep. The following day she looked, and the day after. She asked every trader on the road. She walked the streets near the unfinished building calling their names until her voice was raw. She went under bridges. She checked the market areas where she knew other homeless children sometimes gathered. She asked questions at the motor park. Nothing. 3 days, a week, 2 weeks. They were gone. She sat behind her table on a quiet Tuesday morning 2 weeks after they disappeared, and the full weight of it settled on her. She did not know if they were safe. She did not know if someone had taken them in all the ways that could mean, in a city full of both good and dangerous strangers. She did not know if they had been found by family, or found by trouble, or simply moved on to somewhere she could not reach. She cried that evening for a long time, quietly, alone in her one room, with the kerosene lamp throwing its small, unsteady light on the cracked walls. "I should have done more," she whispered. "I should have done more while I had them." But what more? She had given what she had every day without fail. The question was not really about more. The question was the one that grief always asks. Why wasn't it enough to make them stay? There is no good answer to that question. There rarely is. Chapter 9. Lonely Years of Waiting. Life on the roadside did not pause to allow Ezinne to grieve. The road kept moving. Buses honked. Customers asked for food. Madame Chenier announced loudly that she had always predicted exactly this outcome. I told you they would disappear and leave you with nothing. And Ezinne said nothing and served the next customer and went home and came back the next morning. She was good at continuing. That was perhaps the deepest thing about her, not just the kindness, which could sometimes be worn away by enough difficulty, but the continuing. The ability to fold the pain into some interior pocket and keep the outside of herself functional and present and available. For the customers, for the other vendors who shared the road, for the quiet daily ritual of her work. But she did not fully stop watching for them. Months passed. The unfinished building across the road changed. The land was bought by someone, a wall went up around it, and eventually a new structure began to rise in its place. The corner where the boys had slept became part of a foundation. Concrete poured over the space where Tunde had decided they must remember her. She was in her late 30s now, then her early 40s. The gray found her hair and stayed, first at the temples, then spreading through the rest. Her back began to ache when she stood for too long, a deep, persistent ache that settled in just below the left shoulder blade and never fully went away. The wooden table that she carried on her head every morning was repaired a third time, and a fourth, until it was more repair than original wood. She moved to a slightly larger one-room apartment, only marginally better, but the roof did not leak as badly. She bought a second plastic bench. She added eggs to her menu, fried fresh each morning, and sold with bread to the office workers who came early before the government buildings opened. These small improvements, accumulated over years, were not wealth, but they were evidence of endurance. Every afternoon she still glanced across the road at the time the boys used to come. She could not fully stop. It was not a conscious decision. Her eyes went there by themselves, pulled by years of habit, by hope that had calcified into something quieter but had not entirely died. She still, on some days, the ones when she made more than expected, set aside a small bowl of food at the end of service. Just placed it to one side, just in case. The traders on the road were different now. Madame Chenier had eventually moved away. Her husband had gotten a job in Lagos. New faces took up the stalls. A younger woman named Blessing sold pepper soup where the groundnut woman used to be. A pair of brothers sold roasted corn and yam from a barrel fire in the evenings. They knew Ezinne. They respected her. But they did not know her whole story. The triplets were not a story she told easily. Some things you keep private, not because they are shameful, but because they are too important to risk someone diminishing them with casual response. She prayed for the boys the way she had always prayed, simply, directly, without too many words. God, let them be alive. Let them be well. Let whoever has them be good to them. And then let me see them one more time. And then, on the most honest nights, let me see them at all, even once, just to know. There were moments of terrible doubt. Not about whether she had been right to feed them, she never doubted that, not once. But doubt about whether it had made any difference at all. Whether they remembered her. Whether, as the years stretched out and they grew into whoever they were becoming, Mama Ezinne was anything more than a distant face attached to a plate of food in the memory of three homeless boys who had too many urgent things to survive to carry sentiment from a brief chapter of their childhood. She wrestled with that doubt honestly, and she put it away, and she kept coming back to the road. Because what was the alternative? Stop, eat her food alone and not look across the road, change nothing about herself because she could not be certain she mattered. No, she had decided, a long time ago, who she was. She was not going to undecide it now because life was hard and uncertain. She kept watching, she kept cooking, she kept setting the bowl aside just in case. Chapter 10. The three Mercedes-Benz arrive. It was a Wednesday. She remembered the day clearly afterward, not because she had marked it, Not because she had felt anything unusual in the morning, but because afterward the day became significant and the mind works backward to claim the details. She had cooked beans and plantain that morning. A good combination, hearty, filling, the kind of food that made people sit down with a sigh of genuine satisfaction. She had sold well by noon and was in the quiet late afternoon hour, when most of the lunchtime rush is gone and you have time to think, to breathe, to count your small coins in your palm. The road was its usual self, generators humming behind compound walls, okadas threading through traffic, a truck loaded with building materials grinding slowly in the right lane, the sound of a radio from a shop 2 buildings down, playing an old highlife track that she had known since childhood. And then the road changed. Not all at once. First a stillness, the particular quality of attention that a crowd develops when something unexpected begins to happen. A woman hawking oranges paused mid-call. A man who had been eating from a takeaway plate looked up. The boy who shined shoes beside the pharmacy straightened from his crouch. 3 black vehicles turned onto the road from the junction, moving slowly, too slowly for normal traffic, the deliberate pace of arrival rather than passage. Mercedes-Benz, brand new, the kind of dark, gleaming, absolute black that you see on vehicles belonging to senior government officials or very successful business people. They moved in a line, evenly spaced, like a delegation. The crowd on the road pulled slightly back, the way crowds always do when wealth and formality enter a space, a half-step, a readjustment, the unconscious deference that visible success commands in a struggling economy. The 3 cars came to a stop. They stopped directly in front of Ezinne's stall. She had been looking down at her coins. The sound of the engines cutting off, one after the other, made her look up. She saw the cars. She saw the crowd forming at a respectful distance. She felt the particular charged quality of a moment that is holding its breath. The doors opened. All 6 rear doors in a near-simultaneous movement, as if choreographed. 3 men stepped out. They were tall, all 3 of them, height that made them visible above the crowd even at a distance. They wore dark suits, good fabric, well fitted, the kind that are not bought from a rack but made by someone who measures. Their shoes caught the afternoon light. They held themselves with the relaxed confidence of people who have moved through difficulty and come out the other side with their posture intact. They were handsome, they were identical. Ezinne saw that last fact, and her brain stopped processing entirely for 1 full second. Identical. The same wide forehead, the same serious dark eyes, the same slight tilt of the head when they looked at something that mattered to them. She had known that tilt. She had watched it 1,000 times across a wooden table and a shared plate of rice. Her hand, still holding the coins, went absolutely still. The 3 men looked straight at her, and their faces, all 3 of them, at the same moment broke open with an emotion so large it could not be contained in any single expression. It was grief and joy and relief and disbelief and love, all arriving at the same time, all fighting for space on 3 identical faces that were also, in this moment, unmistakably, the faces of 3 small boys she had once watched divide rice with their fingers. The crowd watched as the tallest man walked forward. His steps were steady, but his hands, she saw, were not quite still. He reached the edge of her table, and then he did not stop. He went around the table, and he dropped to one knee on the dusty road, right there in front of everyone, in his expensive suit and his polished shoes, and he knelt on the same ground where he had once sat as a hungry child. From his breast pocket he brought out something small and old and soft, a piece of cloth faded brown, frayed at the edges, torn long ago from a wrapper. She recognized it immediately. She had torn it herself, years ago, to wipe rice from his chin the one afternoon when he had been too tired to wipe his own face. She had forgotten about it entirely. He had kept it all this time. He looked up at her. His eyes were full. "Mama Ezinne," he said, and his voice shook only slightly, controlled with immense effort. "It's me. It's Tunde. Chapter 11. The Emotional Reunion. The second man stepped forward and knelt beside his brother. I am Solar, Mama. The third man came and knelt, completing the line, his voice the quietest of the three. I am Kunal. Ezinne made a sound that was not a word. It was not a scream exactly, though it had some of the force of one. It was the sound of years of held breath releasing, of a worry that had become so long-standing it had been partly mistaken for something permanent suddenly lifted. She did not think. Her body moved before her mind could form any instruction. She came from behind the table and her knees buckled, and she went down, and the three men caught her before she reached the ground, all three of them, 6 arms, surrounding her, holding her up. My children, she said, my children, my children. She touched Tunde's face with both palms, that exact gesture, the one mothers use to confirm a face they have memorized and want to memorize again. She reached for Solar and held his cheeks and looked at him until he smiled, that same wide, crinkle-eyed smile, identical to the smile she had known, and she laughed through tears. She reached for Kunal and he looked at her with those quiet, deep eyes and said nothing, but he held her hands against his face with both of his, and that was enough. That was everything. The crowd around them had grown large and had gone utterly silent. The high-life music from the radio 2 shops down had been turned off. People who had been midway through transactions buying, selling, eating, haggling had simply stopped. An Okada rider sat on his motorcycle with the engine off, watching. A group of children perched on a low wall, wide-eyed. Nobody spoke. This was not the moment for commentary. Even Madame Blessing, who sold pepper soup nearby and had never heard the full history, felt the weight of what was happening and kept her silence. Ezinne and the three men stayed like that, kneeling together in the dust, in a rough circle, holding each other for longer than can be measured in any useful way. Long enough for it to be real. Long enough for the years to be properly felt, the gap properly acknowledged, the reunion properly entered. When they finally stood, Tunde spoke. He had prepared words she could tell, from the steadiness of them, that he had thought about what he would say if this moment ever came. But even prepared words, when the moment actually arrives, have to be spoken through a living throat, and his was not entirely steady. Mama Ezinne, there is so much to say. We have said it many times already in the cars. Coming here we have tried to practice how to say it properly. But now I am standing here and I don't think there is a practice that is big enough for this. He paused. You fed us when no one in the world cared if we ate. You did it not once, not twice, every day for as long as we were here, and you didn't do it to get something. You didn't do it because you had too much. You did it because you had nothing and chose to give what little you had. That is not a small thing. That is not a thing you forget. Solar leaned in. Tunde said we would not forget. He said it when we were little. He made us promise. Every year he reminded us. Remember Mama Ezinne. We remembered, Mama. We never stopped. Kunal spoke last, as always. We looked for you. When we were old enough to come back, we looked. It took time to find you. But Tunde was right. He paused. You were still here. Ezinne pressed both hands over her heart and could not speak. They explained then what had happened on that terrible day they disappeared. A retired schoolteacher named Mr. Ez, who had come to Onitsha to visit his sister and had been eating at a nearby stall, had watched the boys for several days. He had asked around about them. He had spoken to them. He had spoken to Ezinne's trader neighbors, who had confirmed that the boys were alone and had no family who was caring for them. And he had made a decision. He had 2 children of his own, grown and gone. He had a house in Enugu with empty rooms. He had a wife who, when he called her from Onitsha and described 3 7-year-old identical boys sleeping in an abandoned building, said bring them home. They had come to say goodbye to the unfinished building that morning. They had intended to come say goodbye to Mama Ezinne too, but she had not been at her stall because it was still early. And Mr. Ez, anxious to leave before the afternoon traffic, had said they must go. Tunde had said she must know, we didn't leave without saying thank you. But they had gone. Because they were children and Mr. Ez was the adult, and the adult said the car was leaving. "It is the thing I regret most," Tunde said, "that we left without telling you. I was 11 years old before I understood that you might have thought we didn't care, that you might have worried. I have thought about your face on that day for many years." Mr. Ez had enrolled them in school in Enugu. He and his wife had treated them as their own. The boys had studied with the specific fierce intensity of children who understand exactly what an opportunity is and what it costs when you don't have one. Secondary school. University, all three of them different disciplines, same relentless determination. Tunde studied engineering. Solar went into business and marketing. Kunal studied law. They had started a company together in their late 20s, initially small, then not small. Infrastructure projects, initially in the southeast, then expanding. The kind of work that builds things that last. They had come back to Onitsha with 3 black Mercedes-Benz cars and heavy hearts, and something they had carried in their chests for 20 years, and finally knew how to put down. Chapter 12, The Full Circle Reward. Solar had been speaking for a while now, filling in the years with the same unstoppable energy he had always had, only now the voice was deeper, the vocabulary broader, the certainty of a man who has earned his views through experience rather than just formed them through personality. And Ezinne listened and held both his hands and let the story fill her in, year by year, like water filling a vessel that has been empty too long. Kunal stood nearby, watching her face the way he had always watched faces, reading her, cataloging her reactions, storing them. At one point he said simply, "You look well, Mama." She laughed. "I am old," she said. "You look well," he said again. In that way he had of restating the important thing, as if the original objection had not been raised. Tunde had been making phone calls, stepping a few paces away and speaking quietly into his phone. When he came back, he stood before her with his hands clasped in front of him, the same posture he'd had at 7. She realized, the same way he stood when he was about to say something important. "Mama," he said, "we did not come just to hug you and leave. We have things to say and things to give. Will you let us?" She looked at him. She looked at all 3 of them. These men who had been 3 small boys with no shoes and one shared plate. "Talk," she said simply. They had spent months preparing, he explained. Before locating her, they had already put things in motion the way Tunde always operated, making sure the structure was in place before the feeling arrived, so that the feeling would have somewhere solid to land. The first thing, a shop. Not a roadside table on the street, but a proper shop not far from this street, in fact, on a good corner with real walls and a roof and electricity. Equipped already with a commercial cooker, a large pot, a refrigerator, a proper counter, chairs and tables for 12 customers to sit inside. They had registered it in her name the week before they drove to find her. "You will not stand in the sun anymore, Mama," Solar said. "You will have a place. You will have equipment. You will have a sign on the door with your name on it, Ezinne's Kitchen. Because your kitchen is where the best food in Onitsha comes from, and everyone on this street has always known it." The second thing, a house. A small, decent 2-bedroom house in a quiet street 20 minutes away, already painted and furnished, not extravagantly but properly. A real bed, a roof with no holes, running water, a kitchen with a gas stove, a sitting room with chairs that did not wobble. "You will not sleep on a mat anymore," Tunde said. The third thing was Kunal's, and he delivered it in his characteristic way, quietly, directly, without preamble. "We have opened an account in your name. There is a monthly amount that will enter it automatically. You will never have to count small coins again to decide if you can eat." Ezinne looked at the 3 men for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You didn't have to." "We know," said Tunde. "That is exactly why we did." She looked down at her wooden table, the faithful, battered, repaired 4 times wooden table that had held 10,000 plates of food, and one shared plate for 3 small boys who divided everything equally. "That table," she said softly, "I want to keep it." The three men exchanged a look. Solar grinned. "We will put it in the new shop, on the wall if you like, framed, so everyone who comes in will know where Ezinne's kitchen started." She pressed her lips together and nodded once, and that was all she could manage for a moment without losing her composure entirely. Solar was already directing the driver of one of the cars to help carefully load the table. Connell had produced papers from a leather folder, the shop registration, the house documents, and was explaining each one to her in simple, clear language, waiting while she read, answering her questions without impatience. Tunde stood with her while the others moved around them. "Mama," he said quietly. "Yes, my son. I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Ask." "All those years when we were gone and you didn't know where we were, did you regret it, feeding us?" She looked at him for a long time. "Not for one day," she said. "Not for 1 hour, not even in the hard times. What I felt was never regret." "What did you feel?" "I felt like I had done what I was supposed to do, like I was the right person in the right place at the right time, and I used the chance. Whatever came after was not mine to control." Tunde was quiet for a moment. "Then Mr. Ez, our father, he said the same thing many years ago, when we asked him why he took us. He said, I was the right person in the right place. The rest was not mine to carry." She smiled. "Then he and I understand each other." "He died 4 years ago," Tunde said. "His wife, our mother, is still in Enugu. We would like you to meet her someday." "I would like that," Ezinne said. A car horn sounded gentle, patient. The drivers were ready. Solar appeared at her elbow with the bright efficiency he had always had. "Mama, the car is ready. We are taking you to see the shop first, then the house. Everything is waiting for you." She looked at her stall one last time. The roadside, the bench, the spot where the table had stood for so many years. She could see, in the indent on the road, the faint pressed outline of the table's legs worn into the soft earth by years of repetition, like a signature. Blessing, who had been standing at a respectful distance, stepped forward suddenly. Her eyes were red. "Mama, we will miss you here, but we are happy. We are very happy." Several of the traders and customers who had gathered, a crowd of 30, 40 people, now began to clap. Slow, sincere, building. Not the performative applause of a television moment, but the genuine sound of a community acknowledging something real. Ezinne turned and raised one hand in a small wave. Then she turned back to the three men who were waiting for her. Her 3 sons, grown now in their suits and their polished shoes, holding the doors of 3 black cars open, tall as trees, steady as foundations. She walked to Tunde's car. He took her hand and helped her in carefully, the way you help someone you have imagined doing this for years. She had never been inside a car this good. The seat was soft, the air was cool, the door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. She looked out the window at the roadside stall, the empty space where the table had stood. At the road she had walked every morning for so many years, with her wooden table on her head and her containers in her bags, and her quiet daily decision to show up. The car began to move. Tunde's hand found hers on the armrest. "You will never struggle again, Mama," he said. "I promise." The 3 Mercedes-Benz moved slowly down the road. The crowd watched. A few of the children who had been sitting on the wall jumped down and chased the cars for half a block, laughing, as children do when something wonderful has happened, and they are not entirely sure what, but they want to be part of it. Then the cars turned at the junction, and the road returned to its ordinary noise. Generators and buses and hawkers and the afternoon heat. But something had shifted in the air of that particular stretch of road. The kind of shift that people feel but rarely articulate. The sense that they had witnessed something that would be told and retold over meals, at gates, in the evenings when stories are shared for a long time. Closing narration. Narrator warm, slow, deliberate. This is the story of Ezinne, not a story about wealth, though wealth appears in it, not a story about luck, though luck plays its part. It is a story about what a person chooses to do with what little they have, on the days when it would be completely reasonable, completely understandable to choose otherwise. She was not asked to feed those boys. Nobody required it of her. No church program, no NGO, no government directive said, "Ezinne, it is your responsibility." The road simply placed 3 hungry children in her eyeline on a hot August afternoon, and she had to decide quietly, without audience, what kind of person she wanted to be. She decided, and she kept deciding. Every morning she woke up. Every afternoon she set the plate aside. Every evening she walked home tired, sometimes hungry herself, sometimes ashamed of how little she could offer, and she came back the next day and decided again. There is a kind of courage that does not announce itself. It is not the courage of a battlefield or a dramatic gesture. It is the courage of return, the courage of the ordinary person who shows up day after day and refuses to let the difficulty of things become a reason to stop caring about other people. Ezinne had that courage in abundance. She had it on the days when customers mocked her, on the days when rent was short, on the days when the pot was almost empty and she scraped together what remained and called it a plate, on the days when the boys were gone and she did not know if they were alive, and she still set the bowl aside, just in case. Kindness is not always soft. Real kindness, the kind that changes lives, the kind that a grown man carries in his breast pocket as a faded piece of cloth, the kind that 3 successful men drive across a city to repay, is made of iron. It requires more than feeling. It requires commitment. The decision to give and to keep giving, even when the return is not visible, even when the world says you are wasting what you cannot afford to waste. What you pour into the world does not disappear. It moves. It travels with whoever receives it, carried forward into their days and years and choices. Tunde, Solar, and Kunnel went into a new life carrying Ezinne's plate with them, her consistency, her faithfulness, her quiet insistence that they deserved a real meal and a dignified moment every single day. They carried it into school, into exams, into the boardrooms where they eventually built something real. They carried it the way children carry the things that save them. And one Wednesday afternoon, they brought it back. If this story moved you, if it landed somewhere real in your chest, then please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness exists, that it compounds, that it returns. Subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications so you do not miss the next story. Drop the word blessed in the comments if you believe that every seed of kindness, planted faithfully, finds its harvest. And remember, you may never know in this lifetime the full impact of what you give, but give it anyway. Give it especially when it costs you something. Give it consistently, without audience, without guarantee. Give it the way Ezinne gave, not because you can afford it, but because you have already decided who you are. See you in the next story.